tonight, and it is the wonderful Peter Anderson.
Thanks, Paul. A bit like Sean, this is a repurposed story. I think I'd originally done this for the kindness of strangers, which might become apparent as we get through this. So it was a holiday where I was desperate to get to the bed and breakfast. To put it politely, I was in danger of having an accident in the back of the taxi. Or more bluntly, I was going to crap myself. I desperately needed a loo. But the taxi driver couldn't find Paradise Malahide, my B&B for the night. After the food, and mainly the drink I'd had that day, my bowels were not going to wait much longer. This could end badly. I'm sure we've all been there. Holiday diarrhea, the runs, Gandhi's revenge, Delhi belly, call it whatever you want. You need to know where the nearest loo is. More often when I'm away from home, I get bound up for days. The poo will not pass. Sorry, I lost my place here. The poo will not pass. No matter how hard I try to shift a brick. I said shifter, by the way. But you might ask, what's the big deal with having a bad dose of the runs in a B&B in Malahide? Except it was not in Malahide, that picturesque seaside town just north of Dublin, home to some amazing Ireland cricket matches. No, this Paradis Malahide B&B was in the heart of Africa, on the border between Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of Congo, the DRC. I had just crossed back into Rwanda when the stomach cramps started. I was on the back of a motorcycle taxi, with a driver who understandably only spoke Kinyarwanda and French, and I only speak Northern Irish. So we were lost, and I desperately needed a loo. This trip really began a few weeks earlier when I had to get a visa from the DRC embassy in London. Now, when I say embassy, don't be imagining some grand, majestic building. This was more like a dodgy backstreet massage parlor. Not I hasten to add that I have any idea what a dodgy backstreet massage parlor actually looks like, but the embassy was recently fire damaged, obviously. A gloomy, rundown shop front. However, the person who greeted me was the polar opposite of the dour grey exterior. I was attended by someone I can only describe as one of the lady dandies of DRC, if you've heard of them. A lady or a man, I'm really not sure, who was made up and dressed to kill in the most extravagant, brightly coloured dress you can imagine. The massage parlour image might be more appropriate than I thought. And 4 hours later, I collected my visa, the most colourful visa I've ever seen, almost as colourful and flamboyant as my new lady dandy friend, if a visa can be colourful and flamboyant. Now on this trip, we've had a few trips to Africa, but on this particular trip, my wife Heather was volunteering with Handicap International, working with teachers of disabled children, supporting them in dealing with the double disadvantage of poverty and disability. But I was on holiday on this trip. So I'd planned probably a workman's holiday, but what was probably the most surreal day trip I've ever had. A day trip to what you could call the heart of darkness, Goma, Eastern DRC, where in 1996, over 1 million refugees fled the Rwandan genocide, and where hundreds of thousands of internally displaced people have sought refuge from the never-ending civil war. I got an evening at Traco, a taxi bus from Kigali, the capital of Rwanda, up to the border, ready to cross into the DRC the next day. As the only Mzungu, or white person on the bus, the questions soon started. Why did I want to go to the DRC? What was I doing in Rwanda? Where was I going exactly? And then the questions became more personal. Was I married? Did I have children? How many children? You get the idea. On that trip, Night fell, and night falls quickly in Rwanda. 12-hour days all year round. At 6 p.m. it's still daylight, but by 6:30 it's pitch black. It's hard to describe that Central African darkness. Outside Kigali, when there's no moon, it's a claustrophobic darkness that envelops everything. No street lights, no village lights, just the occasional light of a paraffin lamp from a roadside shop and the headlights of the Atraco as it winds its way up, over and round Rwanda's 1,000 hills. That night I stayed in a small hotel right on the DRC border and crossed into Goma the next day. As well as the 1 million refugees from Rwanda in 1996 and the thousands fleeing the civil war, Goma was devastated by a volcano eruption in 2002. It's one of the weirdest, most unusual places I've ever visited. Lava-covered areas were like barren moonscapes, and yet it's a bustling provincial capital for over 2 million people. I visited a few of the IDP, internally displaced people camps on the outskirts of Goma. I met school teachers, farmers, engineers, tailors, and mothers and children who'd fled the civil war with whatever they could carry. The war was never ending, and the camps had been their home for years. Visiting those camps was a bit like going on an emotional roller coaster. You experience despair, then delight. You flip from misery to merriment, and you see sadness as well as smiles, beaming broad smiles. That all might sound a bit cliched, but it's the truth. When I think of that visit, I remember Muka Bajira. She was a mum with 4 kids and her own mother in the camp. Muka seemed to be full of sadness, unsurprisingly, and yet her kids were full of life, laughing and playing in the extremely basic camp conditions. Now, hospitality is a big thing in African cultures. No matter how little you have, you welcome guests, and as a point of pride, you offer them food or drink. And so I was invited into one of the shelters and offered a drink of home-brewed banana beer. I probably should have taken the cue from my Oxfam colleague who was my guide for the day. He didn't touch the stuff. But I did. It was probably against my better judgment, but I'd never be back here. Who was I to refuse this gesture of hospitality? I was also curious, just what would home-brewed banana beer from an IDP camp in DRC actually taste like? Well, it wasn't the nicest beer I've ever tasted, but it also wasn't the worst, surprisingly. It was a thick, cloudy, fruity, overly sweet IPA type of beer. I tried a sip, and it was drinkable, so I drank a full tumbler. All human life is in these camps, people who've lost everything, making the most of every moment, homebrew included. So that evening, after delays at the border crossing, it was dark before I got back to Rwanda. I got a moto, the motorcycle taxi, and asked to go to Paradis Malahide. The driver nodded confidently, so I felt reassured that he knew the way. Maybe it was just the hour or two that had passed since the banana beer, but perhaps it was the bumpy motorcycle ride. But I started to feel a bit queasy. I was sure I was going to be sick. But then the movement shifted to deep in my stomach and into my bowels, and I knew it was going to be the other end. I needed to get to Alu and quick. I was lost in Rwanda on the back of a motor with a driver who only spoke Kinyarwanda and French, and I only speak Northern Irish. We stopped several times trying to bridge the communication gulf. And often in these situations, I did what Westerners do all the time, try speaking slowly and loudly. Paradis Malahide, I repeated loudly. And then I remembered that there was a brewery at the end of the road to Paradis Malahide. Beer, brewery, Skol beer, brewery, I said. And the moto driver knew exactly where I meant. He knew where the brewery was. Beer, the cause of my impending bowel evacuation was also my St. Christopher on the road to paradise. Paradis Malahide, that is. I made it to paradise, and I was mightily relieved. Paradis Malahide, it's named that because an Irish man from Malahide married Odette, a Rwandan woman, and they opened a B&B on the shores of Lake Kivu in northwestern Rwanda. It's a stunning place in a really remote corner of Africa. And although I do look back and laugh at that episode, more often I think about the camps and Muka and her family and wonder where they are now.
I think I'm taking over duties. Patrick seems to be struggling with his internet. This is a picture of you on your, I can't get my right from my left. This is you on your holiday. Not looking too distressed in that photo, it has to be said. How are you and Heather coping with
Oh, grand.
Good. Yeah.
Spend my day on Zoom, and I can't believe I signed up for a Zoom 10 by 9.
On screens a lot.
Thank you very
much.
much.
It's great you're doing it, Paul. It's great.
It's really good.
We're delighted to have you. It's great to see so many lovely faces from all over the place. In case I didn't point it out the last time, we actually had somebody from Iran on the last Zoom, which was fantastic.